Pornhub blocks access for entire U.S. state. Utah's new age verification law presents significant privacy concerns, critics say. The adult streaming company Pornhub suspended its services in the U.S. state of Utah on Monday in protest to a new law that requires pornography websites to verify a user's age before granting access to their libraries of content. As of Tuesday, anyone with a Utah-based IP address who attempts to visit the Pornhub website will instead be shown a video of adult performer Cherie DeVille, who explains why the website, which is operated by parent company MindGeek, is no longer available. As you may know, your elected officials in Utah are requiring us to verify your age before allowing your access to our website, DeVille says in the video clip. She adds that Pornhub's creators believe that giving your ID card every time you want to visit an adult platform is an ineffective method to protect users and will put children and your privacy at risk. In March, Utah Governor Spencer Cox signed into law a bill entitled Online Pornography Viewing Age Requirement, which came into effect on Tuesday. It mandates that reasonable age verification methods must be adhered to by adult websites available in the state that distribute material harmful to minors. Cox in 2021 signed into law another bill which requires developers of smartphones and tablets to add content filters to such devices sold in the state. Utah's legislature declared pornography to be a public health crisis in 2016, which officials said was harming the citizens of Utah and the nation. This came 7 years after the predominantly Republican state was declared the online porn capital of the United States. Following a study conducted by Harvard researcher Ben Edelman in 2009. In 2021, it was reported by Utah's The Salt Lake Tribune that people representing the conservative-leaning Church of the Latter-day Saints, informally known as the Mormon Church, hold 9 out of every 10 seats in the state's legislature. Digital experts have sided with Pornhub and its peers in the age verification debate. Jason Kelly, the Associate Director of Strategy at digital rights watchdog Electronic Frontier Foundation, believes that moves to restrict underage viewers, while sound in theory, come in parallel to a secondary risk of websites people visit. Their viewing habits can be tracked and connected to their identity, he said in March, and companies don't necessarily have a system in place to protect that data. UN warns of 800,000 refugees in Sudan as foreign evacuations wind down. The United Nations has warned that 800,000 people may flee Sudan as rival military factions continue to battle in the capital, despite a supposed ceasefire. Hundreds have been killed and thousands wounded in the conflict between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, that began on April 15. The crisis has led to a humanitarian disaster, damaged large areas of Khartoum, and reignited conflict in the Darfur region. Foreign governments have been evacuating their citizens from Sudan over the past week through a series of operations by air, sea, and land. Several countries have already ended their evacuation efforts, leaving those who remain to face hardship and danger. Egypt reported that 40,000 Sudanese had crossed its border, while others have gone to Chad, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, or have journeyed over the Red Sea on evacuation boats. Many Sudanese people with dual nationalities have been allowed to board naval ships heading to Saudi Arabia from Port Sudan, but others with Sudanese citizenship alone have been allowed to board, as Saudi Arabia is reportedly not hosting refugees from the conflict. UN Refugee Deputy Chief Raouf Mazza said the agency is planning for an exodus of 815,000 people, including Sudanese citizens and foreign refugees currently living in the country. Around 73,000 have already left Sudan. The fighting has disrupted power and water supplies, hospitals and clinics are out of service, and food and fuel are scarce. The ongoing conflict has raised concerns about the impact on Sudan and the broader region, with the UN warning that the country is at a breaking point. Aid organizations are importing supplies through Port Sudan but need security guarantees to transport them to Khartoum. Despite the ongoing evacuations, many Sudanese citizens are left with limited options to escape the conflict. Power and water supplies are uncertain, food and fuel are scarce, and most hospitals and clinics are out of service. Soaring transport costs are making it increasingly difficult for those who wish to leave. The UN and other aid organizations have reduced their services in Sudan, but the World Food Programme announced it was resuming operations in more secure areas after staff were killed early in the war. IMF warns of more salient risks to further trade fragmentation in Asia-Pacific. The risks of greater trade fragmentation in the Asia-Pacific region are becoming more noticeable, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, said in a report. Risks of further global trade fragmentation are becoming more salient, the IMF said in its Regional Economic Outlook for Asia and the Pacific on Monday. The risks fueling the ongoing trade disputes between the United States and China include the new restrictions on trading high-tech products and the heightened geopolitical tensions linked to the conflict in Ukraine, the report said. The IMF warned in the report that Asia remains especially vulnerable to reduced cross-border trade flows and foreign direct investment. A potential reduction could be affected by the world fragmenting into multiple blocks, with Asia's exporters heavily exposed to China, Europe, and the United States. Meanwhile, the medium-term slowdown in productivity and investment in China, which could sharpen due to fragmentation pressures, may have profound and unanticipated adverse implications for the rest of the region, the report said. The impact on other Asian economies would depend on the degree of export exposure to China's domestic demand and investment and on global value chains via China, the report said. The IMF said it expects the region's economic growth to increase to 4.6% in 2023 from 3.8% in 2022. This means the region would contribute around 70% of global growth. Asia's dynamism will be driven primarily by the recovery in China and resilient growth in India, while growth in the rest of Asia is expected to bottom out in 2023, in line with other regions, the report said. At the same time, core inflation in the region will follow the global trend and continue to be persistent despite signs that it is easing. The financial conditions in Asia have generally eased since last October despite the Asian central banks continuing their monetary tightening cycle, according to the report. Spain, Portugal smash April temperature records. Mainland Spain and Portugal have broken temperature records for April, officials said on Friday, as both countries whirled in an unusually early heat wave that has increased the risk of wildfires. The mercury reached 38.8 degrees Celsius, 101.8 degrees Fahrenheit, at the airport in Spain's southern city of Córdoba on Thursday, surpassing the previous record of 38.6 degrees Celsius in the eastern city of Elche, according to the National Weather Office IMET. This provisional data must still be confirmed, a process that can take several days, a spokesperson for the agency said. The highest temperature for all of Spain in the month of April, however, was recorded in 2013 in the Canary Islands off the northwest coast of Africa when the mercury reached 40.2 degrees Celsius. In neighboring Portugal, temperatures in the central town of Mora reached 36.9 degrees Celsius on Thursday, surpassing the record of 36 degrees Celsius set in April 1945 in the northeastern town of Pinhao, according to the weather agency IPMA. While temperatures began to decrease in Portugal on Friday, the scorching heat persisted in much of Spain with the mercury reaching 36 degrees Celsius in Córdoba. The unusually early heat wave has been driven by a mass of very hot and dry air coming from Africa, coupled with a slow-moving weather system. A high-pressure weather system plus clear skies over the Iberian Peninsula are allowing more sunshine to reach the ground, which is already so dry that it cannot evaporate the heat. The scorching temperatures have prompted warnings about the high risk of wildfires and worsened drought conditions that have already led some farmers in Spain to not sow seeds this year. The Spanish government said it would launch its forest fire monitoring campaign on Friday, a month and a half earlier than usual due to the early arrival of scorching temperatures. This will involve adding reinforcements to local firefighting teams and the continuous monitoring of forest fires across the country, the Interior Ministry said in a statement. Blazes have already ravaged some 54,000 hectares of land so far this year in Spain, compared with just over 17,000 hectares during the same time in 2022, according to the European Forest Fire Information System. Last year, Spain experienced its hottest year since records began, with UN figures suggesting nearly 75% of its land is susceptible to desertification due to climate change. Water reservoirs are at half their capacity nationally, and the COAG Farmers Union says 60% of farmland is suffocating from lack of rainfall. Spain is the world's largest exporter of olive oil and a key source of fruits and vegetables in Europe. Experts say climate change driven by human activity is boosting the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events, such as heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. Tech giant could replace workers with AI, Bloomberg. IBM plans to pause hiring for jobs that can be automated in the near future, the company's CEO told the outlet. International Business Machines Corporation, IBM, expects to cut nearly 8,000 jobs in the coming years and replace them with AI, the CEO of the U.S. tech giant, Arvind Krishna, has told Bloomberg. In an interview published on Tuesday, Krishna said the company plans to slow or completely suspend hiring for back-office functions such as human resources, noting that these non-customer-facing roles currently amount to nearly 26,000 workers. I could easily see 30% of that getting replaced by AI and automation over a 5-year period, Krishna said, suggesting that AI-induced job cuts could affect some 7,800 workers. An IBM spokesperson also told the news agency that the company doesn't currently intend to fire any people filling these roles, but pointed out that any jobs vacated by attrition would no longer be refilled. In an emailed comment to Business Insider, another spokesperson for the tech giant also explained that there is no blanket hiring pause in place and that IBM is being deliberate and thoughtful in our hiring with a focus on revenue-generating roles. The spokesperson added that the company is being very selective when filling jobs that don't directly touch our clients or technology, noting that IBM is still actively hiring for thousands of positions. In late March, a report published by the Goldman Sachs economics research team warned that recent advancements in generative AI, such as the popular ChatGPT, could very soon cause a significant disruption in the labor market. The researchers suggested that as many 300 million workers worldwide could end up being replaced with AI, and that 2/3 of jobs in the US and Europe are exposed to some degree of AI automation. They also noted that generative AI could be used as a substitute for a quarter of current jobs. Despite significant uncertainty around the potential of generative AI, its ability to generate content that is indistinguishable from human-created output and to break down communication barriers between humans and machines reflects a major advancement with potentially large macroeconomic effects, Goldman Sachs said. Earlier this year, a group of over 1,100 AI researchers, tech luminaries, and other futurists, including Tesla CEO Elon Musk and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, signed an open letter demanding a 6-month moratorium on giant AI experiments. The signatories warned that AI systems with human competitive intelligence can pose profound risks to society and humanity if they ever manage to escape the understanding and control of their creators. At least 6 dead after dust storm causes car crash in Illinois. A dust storm that cut visibility to near zero on Monday triggered a series of chain reaction crashes involving dozens of vehicles on an Illinois highway, killing 6 people and injuring dozens, authorities said. Roughly 40 to 60 passenger cars and 30 commercial vehicles, including numerous tractor-trailer trucks, were involved in the pileup on Interstate 55 in southern Illinois, state police said in a news release. The crashes were caused by excessive winds blowing dirt from farm fields across the highway, leading to zero visibility, police said. I-55 is currently shut down in both directions. Not the PM you are looking for, Dutch cops bust DUI guy with Boris Johnson driver's license. The obviously fake driver's license found in the suspect's car featured Boris Johnson's name and photograph, with year 3000 listed as its expiration date. A peculiar incident occurred in the Netherlands where a 35-year-old man from the town of Zeewijderen was found to be in possession of an unusual ID when police arrested him for drunk driving. According to a local broadcaster, the man caught the cops' attention after the vehicle he was driving hit a pole, which prompted officers to move in and stop him for inspection. A subsequent examination, during which the driver initially refused to submit to a breath test, showed that he was indeed driving under the influence, the media outlet notes. What really made this incident stand out, however, was the discovery cops made while searching the man's vehicle, an obviously fake driver's license issued under the name of Boris Johnson, featuring the former UK Prime Minister's photo and date of birth. The writing on the license claimed that it was issued in Ukraine and that it was valid until the year 3000. In a social media post made on the occasion, the local cops snarkily remarked that, unfortunately for the hapless driver, they did not fall for this ploy. Syrian soldier killed, 7 injured as Aleppo airport closed over Israeli attack, state media. 1 soldier was killed and 7 other people were injured late Monday during an Israeli attack on Syria's Aleppo, state media reported. Of the injured, 2 individuals were said to be civilians. It remains unclear as to whether the 5 others were affiliated military personnel. Earlier, a Syrian state television channel reported Israel launched an attack on the outskirts of Aleppo, and that Syrian air defenses had shot down some of the incoming missiles. As a result of the airstrike, the Aleppo International Airport had also been temporarily shuttered. Reports have indicated that structural damages to the airport's runway were detected. State media reported the strikes unfolded just after 11:30 p.m. local time as a barrage of projectiles were fired from the direction of southeast Aleppo. No official confirmation of Israel's involvement in the Monday strikes has emerged, as is typical in such strikes. However, Israeli officials have previously admitted to carrying out such attacks to prevent terrorist actions and stave off hostilities with Iran-backed militia groups. The latest spate of hostilities comes after state media detailed last week that Syrian air defenses had repelled an attack over Homs. The Syrian Defense Ministry later reported that 3 civilians were wounded in Israel's missile attack on the outskirts of Homs. Loneliness a profound health threat, U.S. Surgeon General warns. Social isolation can have negative health impacts similar to smoking 15 cigarettes per day, research says. While the pitfalls of obesity, alcoholism, and cigarette smoking are well known, U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy says another grave risk to public health should be addressed in a similar manner: loneliness. In an extensive advisory on the perils of loneliness released on Tuesday, Murthy argues that the negative health impact of social isolation, which studies indicate can trigger an increased risk of heart attack, stroke, diabetes, and even dementia, is becoming an increasing strain on the healthcare system and the social fabric of America. Right now, millions of people are telling us through their stories and statistics that their tank is running on empty when it comes to social connection, Murthy told The Guardian on Tuesday. He added, "This has to be a public health disorder that we consider on par with tobacco, with substance abuse disorders, with obesity and other issues that we know profoundly impact people's lives." Loneliness can lead to chronic stress conditions, experts say, which can be a cause of additional maladies. A study appearing in the National Library of Medicine even suggested that the risk of premature death linked to social isolation is similar to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. The advisory cites polling information from the 1970s which said that 45% of Americans felt they could trust people in their circles. That figure plummeted to around 30% in similar polling conducted in 2016. It also stated that the amount of time Americans spent alone rose by an average of 24 hours per month between 2003 and 2020. The advent of social media and other online services such as food delivery networks has also reduced people's interactions and needs to leave their homes, the advisory says. These situations were magnified even further by enforced isolation brought about by lockdowns during the COVID-19 pandemic, which Murthy said via the Washington Post on Tuesday, poured fuel on a fire that was already burning. "I want the country to understand how profound a public health threat loneliness and isolation cause," he said. The advisory document also calls for efforts to be made to amend the social fabric of our nation, which includes factors like teaching children how to pursue healthy relationships and for people to spend less time on social media. South Korea touts upgraded military ties with U.S. The two allies recently vowed to improve cooperation on a range of security issues, including U.S. nuclear deployments. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has announced an agreement with the U.S. to upgrade the two countries' military ties, hailing closer defense cooperation after his recent trip to Washington. Addressing a cabinet meeting on Monday, Yoon highlighted the joint declaration made during his visit last week, which pledged enhanced military coordination between the U.S. and South Korea in various areas, as well as plans to boost trade and investment. The alliance has gotten a nuclear-based upgrade, and expanded to include supply chain, industrial, and science and technology alliances, the president said. The declaration also announced the creation of a new nuclear consultative group by the U.S. and South Korea, which is intended to strengthen extended deterrence and enhance cooperation on nuclear planning between the two countries. As part of the stepped-up military ties, last week Yoon and his American counterpart Joe Biden announced that the U.S. would deploy nuclear-armed submarines and bombers to the Korean peninsula, hoping the move would deter future weapons tests by North Korea. Pyongyang responded harshly following Yoon's visit, condemning the regular and continuous deployment of U.S. nuclear strategic assets and the frequent military exercises around the Korean peninsula by Washington and Seoul, which the DPRK has frequently denounced as a rehearsal for an attack. Though some South Korean officials have discussed the possibility that Seoul might seek to develop its own nuclear weapons, during his visit to the United States Yoon said such a move would go against his country's values and its commitment to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. Nuclear weapons are not just a matter of technology. There are complex politics and economics and political and economic equations related to nuclear weapons, he told an audience at Harvard University's Kennedy School in Massachusetts. There are various values and interests that must be given up when possessing nuclear weapons. Though South Korea has vowed to never build nuclear weapons under the NPT, it is ostensibly protected under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, meaning Washington has promised to use its own nuclear arsenal in Seoul's defense under certain conditions in the event it is attacked. China congratulates Uzbekistan on smooth referendum over new constitution. China congratulates Uzbekistan on the smooth referendum on its new constitution, according to remarks by a foreign ministry spokesperson. We believe that under the leadership of President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, the people of Uzbekistan will achieve even greater progress on all fronts in the nation's reform and development efforts, read the remarks made public online Tuesday. As a friendly neighbor and comprehensive strategic partner, China highly values its relations with Uzbekistan, the spokesperson said. China stands ready to work with Uzbekistan to deepen mutually beneficial cooperation in various fields and strive for new achievements in building a China-Uzbekistan community with a shared future, according to the spokesperson. Uzbekistan held a referendum on Sunday, which approved amendments to the country's constitution. The new constitution entered into force on Monday. Vice Media to file for bankruptcy, NYT. The outlet has struggled since it secured major investments from media giants including Disney and Fox. Vice Media, once widely regarded as the largest youth media group in the world, is preparing to file for bankruptcy, the New York Times reported on Monday. The paper noted the company could soon come under the control of an investment firm should it fail to find a buyer. While at least 5 companies have shown interest in buying Vice, the chances of an acquisition are growing increasingly slim, a source with knowledge of the potential bankruptcy told the Times. 3 people familiar with Vice's operations suggested the company could file sometime in the coming weeks, though they did not offer details about discussions with possible buyers. A bankruptcy filing could mean a takeover by Vice's largest investor, Fortress Investment Group, which holds senior debt at the company and would be the first to be paid in the event it is sold. Vice did not confirm whether it was weighing the move, but issued a statement on Monday saying it is engaged in a comprehensive evaluation of strategic alternatives and planning and that its board and stakeholders continue to be focused on finding the best path for the company. Launched in Montreal, Canada in 1994 as an irreverent and often offensive DIY magazine, and driven by the irascible Shane Smith, Vice has shed much of its former punk rock aesthetic. It transformed into a major media concern, courting massive investments from the likes of Disney and 21st Century Fox. though the company was valued at $5.7 billion in 2017 following a $450 million injection from TBG, a private equity firm. It is worth just a tiny fraction of that today, according to the Times. Since its peak, Vice has encountered a more difficult digital media market, and has consistently failed to turn a profit for several years, forcing it to lay off staffers as it hemorrhaged money. Disney reportedly considered buying Vice Media for $3 billion back in 2015, but ultimately backed out of the deal. It is unclear whether Disney is among the 5 potential buyers said to be in contact with the company. Highlighting its struggles, the outlet announced last week that it would be shutting down its Vice World News branch, which made a name with its risky, gonzo-style reporting from conflict and crisis zones around the globe. A recent shakeup in leadership could also signal trouble for Vice, as both its chief executive Nancy Dubik and its global president of news and entertainment Jesse Angelo have exited the company this year. IMF, Asia's economy to grow 4.6% in 2023 on fresh impetus from China. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, on Tuesday projected the Asia-Pacific region's economy to grow by 4.6% in 2023, from a 3.8% increase last year, according to its latest Regional Economic Outlook report. The region will contribute around 70% of global growth this year, with China's reopening providing fresh momentum, the report said. Asia and the Pacific remains a dynamic region despite the somber backdrop of what looks to be shaping up as a challenging year for the world economy, the IMF wrote in an overview of the report. The IMF said global growth is poised to decelerate as rising interest rates and geopolitical conflict affect economic activity, while banking strains in the United States and Europe have injected greater uncertainty into the economic landscape. Meanwhile, it said China's economic recovery and India's economic growth have provided the main impetus for the region's economic vitality. Other emerging economies in the region are growing steadily, though in some cases slightly less than last year. The IMF warned of risks from persistent inflation, saying that while inflation has eased, it is still above targets in most countries. It also said the spillover effect of the banking crisis in Europe and the United States has been limited so far, but the fragility of the global financial environment remains high. It also urged central banks in Asia, excluding Japan and China, to keep monetary policy tight to keep inflation in check, which it said could remain stubbornly high due in part to robust domestic demand. First Republic Bank bailout part of trend towards finance oligopoly. Big Four bank JP Morgan Chase has been named as the buyer for failing First Republic Bank. Economist, professor, and consultant Mark Frost and Robert Hockett, a professor of law and public policy at Cornell University, warned that soon there would be only a handful of finance houses left in the U.S. U.S. finance giants are swallowing smaller regional banks with the help of the Federal Reserve, 2 academics have said. The First Republic Bank became the latest U.S. finance institution to go bankrupt on Monday, following the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, Signature, and Silvergate Bank in March. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, financial watchdog seized control of First Republic and announced that New York-based corporate banking giant JP Morgan Chase would buy it out. The latest bank failure has reignited fears of a repeat of the 2008 credit crunch financial crisis as the White House weighs up whether to bail out investors or only customers up to the deposit insurance cap. Robert Hockett told Sputnik that the bailout did not come out of the kindness of JP Morgan's heart but was part of gradual monopolization of the finance sector. What's happening is we're seeing a further concentration of the U.S. banking sector, Hockett said. So we're getting to the point where the one subsector remaining that is not itself a financialized, one-size-fits-all Wall Street conglomerate banking sector is itself now being gobbled up by the latter. He explained that JP Morgan had already benefited from a huge deposit exodus from smaller banks since the run on SVB sparked by the Federal Reserve raising interest rates and undermining the value of its government bond portfolio that led to its collapse. Depositors with regional and industry-specific banks are seeing the writing on the wall and moving their accounts to the Big Four banks considered too big to fail, safe in the knowledge that the U.S. Treasury, FDIC, and the Federal Reserve would not allow them to go bankrupt. So that is itself then what ultimately brought down First Republic and what brought down other regional banks before it, Hockett said, and what is already shaking the stock prices of the remaining regional banks as of the opening bell again this morning. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve and the government itself is paying huge sums to J.P. Morgan to assist it in its digestion of this giant egg that the snake is swallowing, Hockett said. That policy could set the stage for the complete concentration of the U.S. banking sector into an oligopoly, with maybe a big 3 or a big 2, maybe even a big 1. What we're really witnessing here is a centralization or an oligopolistic formation within the financial services or more specifically banking space, Frost told Sputnik. We're taking banks that have risk for depositors and we're transferring those accounts, slowly but surely, to the banks that we've deemed as a society to be too big to fail. He said the First Republic bailout had cost the FDIC $18 billion of its $45 billion emergency fund. Right now, even on the FDIC list, I think it just came out this morning, there's 171 more banks that are listed at risk, Frost noted. And the list is growing at about 50% per quarter. He agreed with Hockett's assessment that the U.S. Treasury's policy of treating only the big 4 banks as indispensable was helping wipe out their smaller rivals. If you are a big depositor, you have a $3 billion deposit in the bank somewhere, you only do business with big banks because you know that they're going to be saved because they're too big to fail, Frost said. If you look at it as banking dollars, the top 10 banks in the United States have 90% of the money, he pointed out. 1 in 4 people have an account at Bank of America. Kremlin rejects claims of grain deal progress. Talks on extending the agreement have thus far not led to results, according to Dmitry Peskov. The window to extend the Black Sea grain deal is shrinking, the Kremlin warned on Tuesday, as it accused the West of failing to keep its side of the bargain to allow Russian agricultural exports. Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov said talks were continuing between the various sides, but without any results. Russia's position is well known. The deal was extended for 2 months in March, Peskov told reporters. He added that the terms of the agreement that concern Russia's agricultural sector are not being fulfilled. The Kremlin official stressed that he was not able to say when, where, or how the negotiations would continue. Citing an unnamed Ukrainian source, Reuters claimed earlier in the day that the parties to the deal would meet on Wednesday. All parties, hopefully there will be results, the source reportedly told the outlet. The landmark agreement, initially brokered by the UN and Turkey last July, allows the safe export of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea. The produce is primarily intended for poorer nations whose food security is threatened. The agreement also requires Western countries to unblock Russian grain and fertilizer exports. Moscow has demanded that the Russian Agricultural Bank, Rosalkosbank, be allowed to return to the international SWIFT payment system to facilitate purchases of imported agricultural machinery. Russia also wants insurance restrictions on agricultural shipments to be removed, port access for Russian ships and cargo to be reopened, and Russian fertilizer companies to be financially unblocked. The Kremlin has repeatedly stated that not all parties have fulfilled their side of the agreement. Moscow has also complained that the majority of agricultural goods from Ukraine were being shipped to well-fed countries, rather than to nations at serious risk of food shortages. In March, Moscow agreed to extend the deal by 60 days, warning that it will not do so again if other parties fail to honor all of its terms. Russian oil exports to India reach milestone. Overall volumes are reportedly greater than those purchased from Iraq and Saudi Arabia combined. Shipments during April of Russian crude oil to India have, for the first time ever, exceeded the combined oil supply to New Delhi of Saudi Arabia and Iraq, Bloomberg reported on Tuesday, citing data from energy cargo tracker Vortexa. Exports of Russian crude to India during the period amounted to 1.7 million barrels per day, BPD, compared to 812,000 BPD imported by the South Asian nation from Iraq and 671,000 BPD of Saudi Arabian oil it bought. The data reveals a steady increase in India's imports of Russian crude. In March, they amounted to 1.7 million bpd, with Moscow's share of New Delhi's oil imports reaching 34%, double the figure for Iraq, traditionally India's top supplier. In contrast, Russian oil supplies to India totaled just 69,000 bpd, 25 times less, in March 2022. They saw a month-over-month increase to 270,000 bpd in the following month. Overall volumes of oil supplies from Russia are expected to remain steady in May, according to Serena Huang, an analyst at Bortexa, as cited by the agency. The expert explained the projection citing rising competition for the Urals grade from China, the world's second biggest consumer of crude. India, the world's third biggest oil-consuming nation, started boosting purchases of Russian crude offered at a discount after Western states shunned direct supplies from the country in response to Moscow's military operation in Ukraine. U.S. regulator urges deposits reform to prevent bank failures after First Republic buyout. U.S. banking regulator FDIC issued a Monday report proposing 3 key reforms to the way deposits are insured at the country's banks, as a means to prevent the collapse of another lender after 3 have already been wiped out by a banking crisis that began in March. The recent failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, and the decision to approve systemic risk exceptions to protect the uninsured depositors at those institutions, raised fundamental questions about the role of deposit insurance in the United States banking system. Martin J. Grunberg, chairman of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corp., FDIC, said in a statement. This report is an effort to place these recent developments in the context of the history, evolution, and purpose of deposit insurance since the FDIC was created in 1933. As part of its analysis of the banking crisis, the FDIC outlined 3 options for deposit insurance reforms. The first, it said, would be a limited coverage option which maintains the current deposit insurance framework, insuring depositors' money by up to a certain limit, possibly higher than the current $250,000 limit. The second would be an unlimited coverage option that extends unlimited deposit insurance coverage to all depositors. The third would be targeted coverage, which offers different deposit insurance limits across account types, where business payment accounts receive significantly higher coverage than other accounts. The report surfaced as the FDIC closed San Francisco-based First Republic Bank, the third casualty in the country's banking crisis. Top U.S. bank J.P. Morgan Chase bought assets and deposits worth over $330 billion that belonged to First Republic, which has struggled since the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in March. All depositors of First Republic Bank will become depositors of J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, and will have full access to all of their deposits, the FDIC said. As part of the transaction, First Republic Bank's 84 offices in 8 states will reopen as branches of J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. 8,591-meter deep well in Xinjiang tested productive. An 8,591-meter deep well named Shunbei No. 10 in northwest China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region went through an open flow test on Tuesday, proving its productivity. During the open flow test, the air coming out of the inclined shaft was successfully ignited, and the flame was orange. This suggests the existence of an oil and gas flow from the well, which is mainly made up of natural gas. Located in the Taklamakan Desert, Shunbei No. 10 is part of the Shendi, Deep Earth, No. 1 Shunbei Oil and Gas Field Base, a key oil and natural gas project launched by China's energy and chemical giant Sinopec. Across the Taklamakan Desert, 120 wells have been drilled at depths of over 8,000 meters, with each tasked with the mission under the Deep Earth project to drill for oil and gas buried around thousands of meters beneath the desert. In China, more than a third of discovered oil and gas resources are detected underground at 4,500 meters, some being even deeper. Knock on wood, world's first timber transistor conducts electricity. The result of the cross-disciplinary proof of principle effort, hailed as a milestone in biophysics, paves the way for the further development of organic and wood-based electronics and control of so-called electronic plants. The world's first transistor made of wood has been developed by researchers at Linköping University and the Royal Institute of Technology, KTH, Sweden. We have demonstrated a principle that no one else has done before. Certainly, the wooden transistor is slow and clumsy, but it works and the development potential is great, Isaac Enquist, assistant professor at the Laboratory of Organic Electronics at Linköping University, said in a statement. Transistors were invented nearly 100 years ago, and are seen as an important milestone in technological development, on par with the telephone and the light bulb. Today, they are a key component in modern electronics and are manufactured down to the nanoscale. A transistor regulates the current that passes through it and can also function as a switch. Previous attempts to make transistors out of wood have only been able to regulate ion flux and stopped working when the ions ran out. The new development, on the other hand, can function continuously at a selected output signal level. It can also turn the power on and off, albeit quite slowly. Off took about a second and on about 5 seconds. The transistor was created from balsa wood, which was chosen for its even structure and lack of annual rings. Then the researchers removed the lignin, an organic polymer that forms structural material in support tissues, and all that remained were long cellulose fibers with channels where the lignin had previously been. The final cellulose-based structure was coated with a conducting polymer. Enquist admitted that the wooden transistor was created as a proof of principle effort, without any specific application in mind, yet envisaged that it would spur and inspire further research with a clearer and more down-to-earth purpose. Still, possible applications may include the regulation of so-called electronic plants, which is a new technical concept based on the integration of electronics in living plants and a specialty of Linköping University. It may also promote further development of organic transistors. Environmental groups sue U.S. over SpaceX launch license for Texas. Conservation groups sued the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, on Monday, challenging its approval of expanded rocket launch operations by Elon Musk's SpaceX next to a national wildlife refuge in South Texas without requiring greater environmental study. The lawsuit comes 11 days after SpaceX made good on a new FAA license to send its next-generation Starship rocket on its first test flight, ending with the vehicle exploding over the Gulf of Mexico after blasting the launch pad to ruins on liftoff. The shattering force of the launch hurled chunks of reinforced concrete and metal shrapnel thousands of feet from the site, adjacent to the lower Rio Grande Valley National Wildlife Refuge near Boca Chica State Park and Beach. The blast also ignited a 1.4-hectare brush fire and sent a cloud of pulverized concrete drifting 10.5 kilometers to the northwest and raining down over Tittle Flats and the nearby town of Port Isabel, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. SpaceX hailed the launch as a qualified success that will yield valuable data to advance development of its Starship and Super Heavy rocket, major components in NASA's new Artemis program for returning astronauts to the Moon. But Monday's lawsuit said the April 20th incident marked the latest in a series of at least 9 explosive mishaps at Boca Chica, disrupting a haven for federally protected wildlife and vital habitat for migratory birds. Noise, light pollution, construction, and road traffic also degrade the area, home to endangered ocelots and jaguarundis, as well as nesting sites for endangered Camp's Ridley sea turtles and critical habitat for threatened shorebirds, the suit says. The disturbances show the FAA violated federal law by permitting expanded operations at Musk's starbase in Boca Chica without mandating the full environmental impact study, EIS, normally required for major projects, the lawsuit asserts. The 31-page complaint seeks to revoke the FAA license and require an EIS. The FAA's Chief of Staff for the Office of Commercial Space Transportation had stated in a June 2020 email that the agency planned to conduct an EIS, but the FAA subsequently deferred to SpaceX and performed a less rigorous review instead, according to the lawsuit. An FAA spokesperson said the agency, as a matter of policy, does not comment on active litigation. There was no immediate word on the case from SpaceX. Musk, the billionaire founder and chief executive of the California-based company, addressed criticism from environmentalists in remarks during an event on Saturday, saying the debris scattered by last month's launch amounted to a human-made sandstorm. "It's not toxic at all or anything," he said. "It did scatter a lot of dust, but to the best of our knowledge, there has not been any meaningful damage to the environment that we're aware of." U.S. Russia should build new partnerships in space for next half-century. The United States and Russia should seek ways to keep up their cooperation in space amid the heightened geopolitical tensions while also building new partnerships for the next half-century, Space Foundation CEO Tom Zaliber told Sputnik. "Despite our political differences, the fact that we have been working, exploring, learning, and living together in space, as we have for nearly a half-century, has built relationships that transcend our politics," Zaliber said. "My hope is that it continues because the relationships our engineers, scientists, astronauts/cosmonauts, and others have developed during that time frame have shaped a transformational space age. We need to find ways for those relationships to remain in place while building new ones for the next half-century," he added. Underscoring that the 20-plus years of the International Space Station demonstrate the best path toward success in space exploration and development requires partnerships with other nations. "The demands in terms of costs, engineering, and operation of those efforts are a burden to be shared because they cannot be carried alone," he explained. "It will require a global team of talent from international governments and their commercial industries to make our shared aspirations into future reality." Russia and the U.S. have continued to cooperate in space despite sanctions imposed on Moscow in light of the Ukraine conflict. In March, a SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft carrying the Crew 5 mission team, including Russian cosmonaut Anna Kikina, successfully splashed down off Florida's Space Coast after spending 157 days in space. Kikina became the first Russian cosmonaut to board a U.S. Crew Dragon spacecraft as part of an integrated flights agreement signed by Russian space agency Roscosmos and NASA in July 2022. At the moment, Russian cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev, Dmitry Petelin, and Andrei Fedyaev, as well as NASA astronauts Frank Rubio, Stephen Bowen, and Warren Hoberg, and UAE astronaut Sultan Al-Nyadi continue to work at the ISS. The Space Foundation, located in Colorado Springs, Colorado, is one of the leading organizations in space,